Bra. Då så. Då har vi kommit till den sista programpunkten vad gäller föredrag. Men verkligen inte den minsta punkten. Utan här har vi ett tvådelat föredrag att se fram emot. Med en långväga gäst. I have the great pleasure to introduce Mr. Bob Ross, all the way from Massachusetts, and I'm so happy that you wanted to come to Sweden and join us for this meeting. And well, very welcome, and please introduce yourself.
Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's my first time in Sweden, and my wife and I have enjoyed very much coming here, and I look forward to doing this talk. I always have to warn people about me as a speaker. So I'm going to go over a couple of things. I tend to wander around a little bit. I might go over and look at you and comment. I might even ask you a question. If you're uncomfortable, just look away and I'll ask somebody else. But I do get a little bit excited about topics. And this one is, to me, particularly important, as I understand that you guys have programs here in Sweden that are adopting a Floortime model. So during my talk, if you have a question, I'm going to ask you to hold it, because I know we have some time after we'll have a chance to chat, and I'm happy to talk about it, but we do have a limited amount of time. I've done this talk anywhere from an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm going to try to squeeze it into 1 hour, so I have to. But I also want to really help you understand that I'm not here to attack Floortime or to promote ABA. I'm here to help them understand the differences between the two approaches. So I'm going to be very careful in my tone and in my comments. I went down to Washington, D.C., and I was trained by Dr. Stanley Greenspan and by Dr. Weeder in Floortime. Now, I'm a board-certified behavior analyst, but we were dealing with people who were approaching Floortime in Massachusetts and talking about how ABA is bad and Floortime is great. And I didn't feel comfortable telling people Floortime is bad. I didn't know what it was. So I spent the time to go down and get trained in the procedures. I have a certificate. I'm a certified DIR Floortime implementer, and I went through the DVD training series tab there, which is like 15 hours of video. Read the book, went through. I took the time to really know what this is and what it isn't and how it differs from ABA, and that's what I'm going to talk about. And then my purpose is really to educate people on the differences. And one of the things I've found in the time that I've done this is that what Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weeder think Floortime is, and what many people out there who are doing it think it is, are two different things. There's a lot of people who I think do something they call Floortime that is actually more like ABA. And what I want you to understand is how the people who invented Floortime, who train in Floortime, what they think it is, and what they think people who do Floortime should be doing. Because some of you may not recognize, if you are familiar with Floortime, your version of Floortime may not be what Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weeder think Floortime is. And that's what I really want you to understand. So, I'm going to talk about the sort of philosophical basis for the two treatments and how they differ. I'm going to talk about the assessment methodologies, because if you're doing ABA treatment or you're doing Floortime, what you assess in terms of child behavior differs dramatically. And as a result, so do the intervention goals, so do the intervention procedures. And we're going to talk about all of those. And at the end, I'm going to talk about sort of the issue of hybrid models. Some people do an ABA and a Floortime model. And there's something that we in Massachusetts really struggled with, because we actually had to sue the state of Massachusetts to allow us not to participate in a dual model. Because we were compelled under state regulations to do so, and felt that it was interfering with our treatment. And I'll tell you why. But assuming that most people here are familiar with an EIBI, ABA model, they come from a very particular perspective. ABA and behavior analysts try to understand behavior from a very particular perspective, a scientific perspective. We analyze behavior. We look at the, essentially the phenomenon. So if we have someone who's engaging in problem behavior, We want to understand all the variables that affect that behavior, and we're going to change some variable related to affecting that behavior. We do that by describing and collecting facts about that behavior. It occurs in some conditions, it doesn't occur in others. The child has learned to do some activities but not others, and there are certain variables that may affect that. When we know enough about, for instance, if reliably the parent gives a lot of attention after the kid does it and rates are high, then maybe attention might be a reinforcer, and we need to look at giving that for adaptive behavior and providing less for problem behavior. We can make predictions that if I give you attention for some other behavior, rates might go up if it's a reinforcer for you. And as a result of that, we then change our interventions as a function. So, components of an ABA program include a behavioral emphasis, one-to-one instruction, a comprehensive curriculum that addresses the core deficits of autism. One of the things that I'll be critical later on today about, in the second presentation, about programs that aren't comprehensive, that address visual discrimination tasks, simple kind of gross motor activities, and not core deficits of autism like social language and interactional skill deficits. Includes integration and individualized treatment interventions. One of the core things about a good ABA program is it isn't just everyone has the same curriculum across all kids with autism. We individualize based on a particular child's needs, strengths, areas of deficit, and families participate in ABA treatment when it's done well. Also, ABA treatment is intensive. A good ABA program typically involves 25 to 40 hours of treatment intervention. In the original SWABA study, kids got anywhere from 25 to 60 hours, depending on the time. In Floortime, and I will say Floortime a lot, but I really should be saying DIR Floortime, and I'll explain why. The D, which stands for Functional Developmental Levels, and I'm going to explain how that isn't the development that you might think. When we think of development, we think of typical child development. In Floortime, that actually means functional developmental or emotional developmental levels, which is something that Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weeder invented. And I'll go into some details. I stands for individual differences in sensory processing, which means in a Floortime model, we identify individual difference in each kid and how they process sensory information, be it auditory, tactile, other sensory inputs. It's relationship-based, and that's a key component of Floortime, which I'll go into some level of detail about. These are the elements that are sort of put together, lead to what do we do? How do we operationalize functional developmental levels, individual differences, and relationship-based treatment? Well, they're operationalized in Floortime. So DIR is sort of a philosophical piece, and then Floortime is how we implement the treatment. Now, I always find this tricky because, and I will say this a lot, I will quote a lot from the training manuals and from the training because I don't want to color it with my perspective. But Floortime is considered a process or a concept, and you can call it either one, to which therapists make a special effort to tailor interactions to the child at his or her unique functional developmental level and within the context of their processing differences. That's the sort of guiding, that's what Floortime is. Now, if you're like me, I'm going, all right, I still don't know what it is. There's a lot of words there that have a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. So, theoretical basis. Fundamentally, Floortime starts at this perspective. There are 6 basic developmental skills or milestones, and these are emotional milestones that lay the foundation for all of our learning. That in early childhood development, these 6 functional developmental levels or emotional developmental levels have to occur. And if they happen, you're a typically developing kid. If you miss one of these emotional milestones, you develop autism. And I'll talk about how you miss these in just a minute, because that's the piece that to me is the most frightening part. But building those foundations help children overcome symptoms. Their fundamental perspective here is somehow early on you missed an emotional milestone. We don't need to work on skills, because skills aren't your problem. Your problem is these missed emotional milestones. And so the treatment is focused on establishing those emotional experiences that you somehow missed in your early development that led to you developing autism. So here are those 6 developmental milestones. And I want you to try to think of a concrete example of what those mean. So shared attention and regulation. I assume shared attention means I look at Dad, he looks at me, right? Okay, that's shared attention. Regulation. That could mean a whole bunch of things, couldn't it? You do or don't do things, you follow a direction if I give to you, you tantrum or don't tantrum, regulation. Engagement and relating. Well, if I'm looking at you and you look at me, aren't we engaging and relating? But I guess we're also doing shared attention. Purposeful emotional interaction. If I look at you, you see some overlap in these? What do these terms mean? And it's one of the challenges I had in the training, is when I would ask for things like, what does that mean and how does it differ from that? I never really got a great answer to any of those questions, because any person can interpret any of these things in any way they would like. And you're never wrong. Social problem solving. So if I look at you and ask for something, I'm solving a social problem, which probably means I haven't missed that milestone. But if I want something and I don't get it, then I've missed that milestone because I'm having a problem with regulation, engagement relating, purposeful emotional interaction, and problem solving. So the same behavior that's evidence of having a skill is also evidence of not having that skill. Creating ideas. Well, how do you know I'm creating an idea? These are things often that are inferred from the fact that you do or don't do things, rather than they are descriptions of what people do and don't do. Connecting ideas together and thinking logically. So these are developmental milestones that somehow, for kids who develop autism, are missed and have to be remediated. This is a fundamental problem. It isn't that the kid doesn't attend a language. It isn't that the kid's language skills are delayed. It isn't that they don't possess some behavioral skills. It is that these emotional milestones are missed. Fundamentally, if you implement a Floortime approach, this is what you believe the problem to be. You don't believe the problem has anything to do with skill acquisition or loss. So, philosophical approach. Floortime starts with this hypothesis that kids miss these milestones and then implements treatment, Floortime, to fix that problem. That's where they're coming from. That's why they do what they do. That's very different than if you're a behavior analyst or doing an ABA treatment model where you believe something very different, and I'm going to go through that in just a minute. The interesting thing about this, if you're doing Floortime and that kid's not responding, you don't change your hypothesis. You don't say, maybe I'm wrong here. Maybe there isn't a missed milestone. It's still true. And in my world, as a behavior analyst, when I have data, I believe that you're doing it to escape a demand, and I implement a treatment consistent with that, and behavior doesn't get better, I rethink my hypothesis and change it. That's not true in Floortime. It's always true that if we're seeing this disorder of relatedness, that there's missed milestones and those need to be addressed. Now, one of the interesting things for me in doing this research was finding out that the National Research Council in the United States did a review of all the literature related to the hypothesis that underlies Floortime, and says, hey, you know, there's actually no evidence to suggest that this hypothesis is true. There isn't evidence that supports it. That doesn't change the belief of people who do it, though. The fact that their fundamental hypothesis has yet to be supported by any objective empirical evidence, it's not that important. In behavior analysis, we start with a simple assessment. We start off saying, here's what this kid does do, doesn't do. Here are the variables that affect behavior. And then, once we then implement teaching procedures consistent with those facts about that learner. If our facts suggest we're wrong, we change our intervention. I mean, I've routinely believed a kid was reinforced by some form of attention, implemented a procedure and found out, I'm not on the right track here, and changed my procedure. This is what we do. We do some sort of error correction procedure or some teaching procedure. We modify it based on the fact that we either have a good outcome or we don't. If they don't work, we change. Disconfirming data makes us change what we do. That's what good teachers do routinely. It's what good parents do. You say, oh, that didn't work, let's try something else, rather than, hey, that didn't work, must keep doing it because this is what our philosophy says we must do. So, this is the piece that, are any people in the audience people who actually implement floor time? Because I'm always, no one will admit it anyway. One of the things that really shocked me when I went down and when I went through the training series, which is this: children require very specific emotional experiences in their early development. That's a fundamental belief of Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider. And when their environments don't provide those nurturing interactions, and these again, their quotes, we see the development of a disorder of relatedness. This results in the ongoing increasing withdrawal of lack of opportunity to learn from other people. I'm going to pull some clips because I think this is more powerful coming from Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider. And hopefully
So we have to have lots and lots of interactions with children that have to do with exchanging emotions and have to do with a fundamental sense of relatedness. When we deprive children of this relatedness, we see children in orphanages and other settings, they don't grow, language doesn't develop, cognition doesn't develop. And what's been missed for a long time with our research colleagues in neuroscience, it's often been assumed that the environment operates like a little switch. Oh, language will come in if you just turn on the switch. In other words, you can't deprive a child entirely, you just have to give them a little bit of environmental nourishment, but any kind will do in any sort of family situation. From our work with children with autism and other developmental problems, we see that that doesn't happen with children with challenges, that they need very specialized environments. And there's a reason why children start talking with therapy or with a proper home program. Well, I think what the original observers ignored was the fact that in many of the families where there are not developmental challenges, these interactive patterns that support these 6 functional levels, engagement, interaction, signaling, problem solving, use of language in an imaginative and functional way, these things are happening automatically. And so they're taken for granted. And they're subsumed under the notion of just broad environmental support. There hasn't been awareness that the environmental support that supports proper brain growth is most likely very specific and supports each of these 6 functional areas. We see it in the children with special needs, and we see it also in children at environmental risk, where the environments are just very unavailable, very withholding, and very overstimulating. The children don't develop proper language, cognition, or emotional and social skills. And in normal development, where these things are developing, all these things are in place. The parents are supporting engagement and regulation and two-way communication and problem solving and creative use of ideas. So my hypothesis would be that the environment actually provides just as specific nutriments to the proper growth of the brain that our internal biology provides in terms of proper enzymes and proper biological pathways, that both have to be in place, the biological substrate and the experiential environmental. And the experiential environmental is much more specific than we ever realized before, and I think we've got a handle now on this roadmap.
By the way, that's Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider, and there's 15 hours of them working with kids and sitting there and having these back and forth conversations, and it is a little bit interesting to see those.
What are their relationships like? What is the interactive use of affects like in the family now? And what would be the ideal pattern to support enhanced development? And what is the pattern we want in the therapeutic program at home and at school to support enhanced development?
Because we know there are underlying issues that may be interfering the automatic development as we typically see it. And we can begin to raise questions in our mind. Okay, why is this happening? Parents try to find solutions to engage their children. Children find solutions to dealing with the world around them. And by examining this open-ended observation, we have our best chance of looking at where things are and a chance to see what we can do to facilitate more effective engagement.
Now, I don't know how well that came across, or how clear that came across, but fundamental to the treatment of floor time is a belief that parents cause autism. refrigerator mothers and refrigerator fathers who are emotionally unavailable. Their kid was typically developing, they didn't provide the right nurturing environment, and as a result, their kid developed a disorder of relatedness. That is a fundamental belief, and that is what the treatment is designed to fix. These parents have poor interaction skills, and so parents need to be trained on how to provide the right emotional experiences for their children. And if they don't do that, these kids will continue to have autism. That is an important understanding, because I think a lot of people who do Floortime don't know that that's what they believe.
Are they saying they can cure autism?
They believe that if you address those 6 functional emotional milestones, that language will come automatically. All of those other things will magically appear. These aren't deficits in skills that kids have.
Autism will be gone.
Autism will be gone. Yeah, take that longer clip with Dr. Greenspan. He goes fairly into detail about, in typical environments, people miss it. All that emotional support is there. And it's in these other environments where some parents don't provide those right nurturing experiences that these disorders of relatedness emerge. And that these are, as he said, the environments are withholding and understimulating. Parents are blamed for causing autism in Floortime, and the treatment in Floortime is to fix those relationships between the child and the parent. That's what most people don't realize about doing Floortime. Floortime, you start off with a belief that this kid was a typically developing child. Was fine, except that they unfortunately had a parent who withheld emotional experiences from their kid. And as a result, their child developed autism. And so now we've got to train the parent on how to have the right kinds of emotional interactions and how to use affect and language with their child to fix this relationship, to correct those missed milestones, so that all of the language will come in typically. And I'll show you some clips later on where that's exactly what they say at the end, is that that's going to come in just fine. Because there's no need to work directly on those things. They're not the problem. The problem is the emotional relationships and the interactive use of affect. So, to me, this is what's really important in terms of understanding those differences. Floortime and ABA differ dramatically on cause. And as a result, they differ dramatically on treatment. And there are plenty of people, I think, who do Floortime who I think were trained in people on some of the kinds of philosophies about interaction in terms of use of affect and language, which are really good things to use when you're doing any teaching of a kid, but not understanding why you do it and what it is in the service of. So, all of the interventions and things I'm going to talk about flow from that philosophical difference. It's really important to understand, because it makes sense for a Floortime therapist to use certain kinds of assessments and have certain goals, because they believe they're addressing a different problem. So the Floortime measurement is related to that hypothesis of cause. They don't measure developmental level, language level, typical development kind of milestones. They measure the emotional milestones and where that kid is in relation to that. So what is measured is very different. They use something called the Functional Emotional Assessment Scale, or FEAS, which was invented by Dr. Greenspan, and I'll tell you about some of the research on the FEAS at the end. In behavior analysis and in typical treatment, probably even in those non-ABA programs, in schools, we look at norm reference criteria. We look at developmental sequence to see whether or not a treatment is improving the outcome for that child. They don't. They believe that's actually wrong to look at, because that's not the problem. And if you're just going to focus on skills and not the actual problem, well, that's a bad treatment from Dr. Greenspan's perspective. So, that philosophy really matters. The goal in Floortime, and there are, one of the challenges of going through the training and using the DVD training series and the book Engaging Autism, is they frequently conflict. When I talk about the 6 emotional milestones, I may also talk about the 9 emotional milestones, because they're used. And if you listened carefully when he talked about his 6 levels, they differed from the ones I had up earlier. Happens all the time throughout the videos. But here's the 9 emotional stages of emotional development. you'll see they differ from the 6 I put up earlier. These come from the manual Engaging Autism versus the 6 which come from their DVD training series on how to do the therapy. So if you read that one, there's 9. If you read this one and go through training, there are 6. And you sort of go, okay, which one should I listen to? And the answer is all of them. But if you look at some of these things, I struggle with things. What exactly is multi-causal triangular thinking or gray area emotionally differentiated thinking? Yeah, I sit there and go, I don't know. But evidently they're critical things to teach. And you know, I was trained in a certain way. And I learned, I said, if you tell me what it actually is, what the kid has to do or not do, I can figure out how to teach it. But if you can't describe what it actually is, how do I know if I taught it or not? How do we know he doesn't already do it? It's a problem. So, specific goals in Floortime. Neither of them, neither the training series nor the book, actually have specific goals. The whole thing focuses on essentially broad areas that aren't operationally defined and subject to significant variability. So almost anybody can interpret almost any of those things to be anything you'd like. Saying that the kid has met it now or has not met it. In terms of the sort of specific procedures, I'm going to talk about them in some brief detail to the degree I can, but something called opening and closing circles of communication. So for instance, how you doing? And so how are you enjoying the conference so far today? Oh, I'm glad to hear that. It's nice of you to come. So, we just opened and closed some circles of communication. And so did you and I. Because I looked at you and you looked back at me. How many did we have? Was me talking to you initially and you responding 1, me opening and then you closing, or was it you continued to open 1 and then we had another one? And so how many did you count? And one of the things that I struggled with in my training with them was I was trying to get them to operation define a circle of communication so we could see whether we're getting more of them, because this is a good thing, right? And so we had this one moment where I counted 5, someone counted 15, someone else said there were 2, and Dr. Greenspan said we were all correct. Because I guess there are no wrong answers. And it depends on how you, so if you apply your own internal standard to what that is, then your standard is the right standard and you can measure off your standard. Can 2 independent observers say that? No. But that's not important. It's about the relationship between the 2 of us. And so all that matters is what I think at that moment in that condition. And it can change the next time I work with you. So we might have had 1 or we might have had 17, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is, was it genuine? I don't know, it happened, so I think it was genuine. I mean, it did not happen, so how do you say it was determined? Doesn't matter. But we want to build on that and inspire. The key thing that I think is really important to pay attention is how often is something a kid does or says referenced, and how often is it, how do we feel about what we're doing? And to me, that's the fundamental difference. And this is a lot about really aspirational language. I want to aspire you to engage with me. So if you punch me in the face, I may have inspired you to engage with me, and that's pretty good, because there was a lot of intent, and clearly some affect behind that. Rather than, I don't know, punching people might not be a good thing. I'd like to see a reduction in hitting other people. And I can interpret that to be a really good thing or a really bad thing, depending on how I'd like to interpret it. I can say I wasn't, happy that you punched me, but I should be really excited about the fact that you engaged with intentionality. A lot of affect there, and there was a reciprocal interaction. So we opened and closed some circles of communication when I got my black eye. Follow the child's lead. This is one that I can't imagine is a bad idea. We should understand that it's a really good thing for us to look at what a child is interested in doing. I mean, when I go and meet a child in a home for the first time, and I do direct therapy with kids, have for years, 30 years now, and I carry a direct caseload. I don't go in and decide, I'm going to tell that kid what to do, what activities I'm going to do, what materials I'm going to use, and what reinforcers I'm going to use. I spend some time observing that child and find that child's interests, find what that child spends time doing, what things are reinforcing to that child, how they spend their free time if no one's imposing requirements on them, so that I can find effective reinforcers. So I would say I'm following the child's lead. And Floortime, it's a little different. In Floortime, follow the child lead means that basically you follow the child around. And so you're not supposed to direct the child to do an activity. Like, I will find an effective reinforcer and I will try to get the child to do something for me to give it that, so the child wants to do stuff for me. Because ultimately I want to get this child being able to attend to an instructor and respond to an instructor. To some degree, there's going to be some direction on our part. In Floortime, it really is an emphasis that you want to follow the child around and then try to engage in their world. Enter their world is a phrase that's used a lot, and you'll see it in some of the videos. In EIB, the goals are very different. They're specifically talking about improving the child's adaptive function. We have some baseline level of performance. This kid, he doesn't use words, and we like, or doesn't request preferred items, doesn't demand for things. Well, all right, we're going to establish mandate. We're going to try to get requesting to happen. We want to increase the number of items they request for. We want to increase the use of language. There's specific functional goals and developmental trajectory we're trying to build. It's based on what do kids that age do and don't do. Because we feel like if that kid's language is delayed, if we get their language to at typical language levels, we've made a change and improvement. Same thing with functional skills. And that line about subject to independent confirmation, to me, is one of the core differences. I can tell you the kid's better than he used to be because I can say, excuse me, here's the assessment done when we met that kid and did the initial assessments, their language and functional skill level. And here's what I'm saying it is now. And you can repeat that assessment and say, yes, they are, or no, they're not. I can say, oh, this kid reads at an 8-year-old level. And you say, no, he doesn't read. I don't get to make that up. It's subject to independent confirmation. And in Floortime, I can say, we have an ongoing back and forth reciprocal circle of communication that sometimes exceeds 50 open and closed circles. And quite frankly, that would be something that a Floortime person would not say, because counting them actually interrupts the flow in the relationship. But they're operationally defined, they're measurable. And they're directly related to identified skill deficits. And by the way, for people who are taking pictures, I will be happy to make a PDF of this presentation available. And I don't know if they're recording? Yeah. Okay, so, and it also is available through the Cambridge Center for Behavioral Studies. They recorded me doing it in California a couple of years ago, and it's available in multiple ways. But we don't hypothesize the cause of dysfunction other than we think autism is a disorder of unknown, it's a neurological sort of unknown etiology. We don't know the cause. We do know the effects. We know you don't do stuff and you do more stuff we don't like and not enough of stuff we do like. And that's what we focus on. Data are collected, again, subject to independent analysis. Water? Yeah, I think I have one over here. Apologize for coughing in there. There we go. All right. So how are the treatments actually done? I've got one, but thank you. Appreciate that. All right. So cornerstone of Floortime, again, those 3 elements. Parents do Floortime with their children, promoting the kind of experiences that promote mastery of the developmental milestones. Why do parents do the treatment? Because parents are the cause, right? I mean, how can we possibly treat this disorder of relatedness without addressing the fact that we've got a parent who can't relate on an emotional level correctly with their child? So we have got to train and teach the parent to do these interactions. Other therapists also do the treatment. And their treatment is really supposed to be guiding the parents to do this correctly. When I show the videos of Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider a little later on, you'll see what they're doing in those videos is modeling the behavior of the speech therapist, of the occupational therapist, physical therapist, a special educator. Here's how you're supposed to coach the parent into interacting with their child. That's the focus of the treatment. It is not that I am supposed to treat that child. I am supposed to treat the parent so that they can treat the child, because the fundamental problem here is their interactions. Parents are supposed to work on those responses in their style of relating related to those emotional interactions. So hypothetically, parents need to be expert on those 6 or 9 emotional milestones so that they can change their interactions related to those skills. And I say skills loosely, those concepts. So 2 main goals, and that's again according to Engaging Autism. Those goals aren't specified in the training series, teaching you how to do this, which is so follow the child's lead means harness their natural interests, join him or her in their own world. And that's a really interesting thing, because I like to say, and again, this is my perspective, not that, but if that child is in a world where they don't engage and interact with people and engage in a lot of problematic behavior, why would you join them there? Wouldn't you want to get them into the world you actually would prefer they function in? But the process, no, that's what I'd say as a behavior analyst. If you're a Floortime person, like, hey, look, this child has chosen to withdraw into that world because of you. So you get in there with them, and then you'll bring them back. But you need to go where they are. And that's an important thing to understand. We're sitting there trying to get this kid to follow a direction, to attend to a thing, to respond reliably to teaching procedures. They're trying to go in there and say, look, I had to go and join you because I caused your autism. I've got to repair our relationship. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go and be there with you in that world. And it actually specifies, it's page 70 or it's 179, where if the child's engaging in self-injurious behavior, if they're banging their head on the floor, what should you do? You should bang your head on the floor. Follow them, try to create some reciprocal interaction, get them engaged with you, and motivate them to do some other thing with you. Maybe next you both punch the wall, and then after that you might get them to do some activity, and you can shape that into something. Now they don't call it shaping, but they say, rather than say we need to disapprove of this thing, is we need to stop judging those kinds of behaviors and recognize that those occur because this is a child who you treated in a very specific way to cause this autism, and you now have to repair that relationship. You don't repair that relationship by judging them and saying, that's inappropriate behavior. Where you and I might say, hey, I really don't like them banging their head, I should probably not reinforce that. That would be really contrary to the relationship you're trying to repair and establish. Bringing the child into a shared world. Now, again, how do you know that right now, in the house you live in with that child, and you're doing things every day, according to Floortime, that's not a shared world. Right? I mean, think about that for a second. How is it that I live with that kid every day, help them get dressed and eat and do all these things, but we're not in a shared world? And so, objectively, how do you know that we've moved from not being in a shared world to being in a shared world? And what Dr. Greenspan would say, and again I'll be paraphrasing him, is that it's not a shared emotional world. It's not a shared social world. It's a kid who's not social, and because of our relationship. So we need to get them to a place where we look at each other and we have genuine, real emotional experiences on a day-to-day basis that are related to affect and reciprocal engagement and all of those kinds of things that are yet undefined. But the line that really strikes me, and this is my bold, not theirs, for a variety of reasons, meaning you withholding all those emotional interactions, the child has elected to be self-absorbed, aimless, or seemingly withdrawn. Dr. Greenspan actually believes children who are brought up by these cold, unfeeling, emotional, deficient parents, their kid looks at this and goes, I'm out of here, I'm going to go into this, I choose to go into this world of autism. It's a choice kids make as a function of these refrigerator moms and dads. And that just literally blows my mind. I cannot believe that in this day and age, people can believe that about kids, that they choose to become autistic. So let's get to that D for developmental. And I talked a little bit about this earlier on. Understanding where a child is in their emotional development is critical to planning. So you've got to do some assessment of those 6 or 9 emotional levels to figure out where they are. Now there is no scale and no measurement system other than the FEAS, which is the Functional Emotional Assessment Scale, which has never been validated in any measurement sort of testing in any way except by Dr. Greenspan himself. But theoretically, that developmental level is going to impact treatment. Knowing where they are and that obviously is going to help you figure out what kinds of things you need to work on with mom and dad. So I'm going to show you some clips from the training series. Now, there are 2 kids. Gary, who's 22 months old, his expressive language, 1 to 2 words after watching hours of his clips. Only once in a while do you see a word or a word approximation. Not a lot. Receptively, there are a couple instances where he follows a 2 or 3 word instruction. Not a lot, but there are a couple instances. He understands some simple concrete object labels, but he's asked questions throughout hours of video, and I actually sat there and watched him and had a little chart that said, so what do you want to do? What should we do next? Where would you like to go? Who should do that? All those questions, literally in somewhere in the neighborhood of several hundred questions, he responded to essentially 1 of them out of hundreds. He doesn't answer questions. Now, I say responded in the sense that he did something consistent with the question. He didn't respond with language. Crazy. He never answered an open-ended question, yet that is fundamentally what happens to him when you see some of the clips. You'll see over and over again. We ask a kid who doesn't have the language skills, the developmental language skills, to understand the question that's being asked and to respond to that question. Being asked questions, and I will describe that procedure in a somewhat critical way in a minute. Then we also have Alex, who's 2. Same thing, 1 to 2 words, receptively 2 to 3 words, never responds to questions. I say that because I want that's from our perspective, their developmental level. Now watch the treatment in action.
Who are you calling with the bell? Who should come to you?
Become a part of it. Become a part of it.
Did you call me with your bell? You don't want the bell. What do you think the dog can do with the bell?
So you're going to have to join the bell.
Okay,
You join the
then.
bell. I need to see that bell too.
Gary, look, I can make a noise too. Gary, let's see, can you bring your bell over here and make a noise?
I want to see that bell too.
Let's see that bell.
Can I
Come on,
ring the
try.
bell? Can
Come
I
on,
ring the
ring the
bell?
bell.
Don't pull it. See if
Come on,
I
ring
can
the
try
bell.
it.
What can we do with this?
I got the bell in my hand. I got it on my hand. Put it in my hand. Oh, you can't get it.
Look.
Can you get
What are you
that
gonna do
bell?
now?
Can you get that bell?
What will you
Can
do
you get
now?
that bell? Can you get that bell? It's on my head. Can you get it?
What are you gonna do?
You gotta.
Are you
say-
stuck in the
You
crown?
gotta say bell. Put one hand on it. Put one hand on
Can
it.
you tell mommy bell? Tell
Bell.
mommy ding dong. Tell mommy ding dong.
Ding dong.
Ding dong. Ding dong. Say ding dong. Ding dong.
Okay, that was good, Mom. You see how you drew right in?
This is the
You know what you-
training.
But by becoming enticing, he went right after the
Right,
bell. And he
right.
re-engaged with you and persisted.
Okay.
Alex, which one do you think Daddy wants? You want to look in there.
You gonna give that to
Right,
mommy
and
or to
put it in.
daddy?
Try to think of it. You want one. Do you want more? I want more. No, these are mine. Try to work with his intent of getting all these markers out if we still have them.
We still have them.
Okay.
Can I put them back in?
Oh, it's-
So big. What happened next?
Are you asking questions? Are you going to charge? Is he going to get bigger or smaller?
Where's Clifford?
So, I look at these videos and I see literally 2 people asking him questions he doesn't understand and never responds to, and then when he doesn't respond and heads in other directions, asking him language, tons and tons of language, utterly developmentally inappropriate, inconsistent with that. Say I want the bell, say I want the bell, say ding dong. We'll just keep changing the expectation, use it. If you think developmental means developmental level of that child, you don't understand floor time. They're engaging him at the emotional level, not at the language level. You can disregard his language functioning in floor time and be absolutely correct. Because it's not about that. It's about, are they trying to engage him on those emotional levels? And here's what I like to call that procedure. He said, essentially, both of those kids were systematically practicing not attending to and not responding to language. Now, a kid with autism, generally speaking, doesn't reliably attend to and respond to language. If I give you hundreds, if not thousands of opportunities to practice systematically not responding to language, is your language skills going to get better? No. I like to refer to this, and my wife is in the back up there. She's a speech and language pathologist. And we had a conversation years ago about both being annoyed by people who talk too much to kids who don't respond. and in the course of that conversation, we evolved the term systematic ignore language practice. Because that's how I think of it. Giving kids opportunities to systematically practicing disregarding a human being using language and talking is not going to enhance the outcome for a child with autism from a behavior analysis perspective. It is from a floor time perspective. An appropriate and reasonable thing to do. But from my point of view, having a kid, I say stuff, you do nothing, I say stuff, you do nothing, I say stuff, you do nothing, pretty soon language becomes irrelevant in your world. And that's a real problem. That to me is one of the more harmful things. You know, if I was king of the world, people who practice teaching kids with autism to disregard language would not be allowed to be anywhere near them. Because that's harmful. If you're familiar with the speech pathology term mean length of utterance, how many words we use, that should be a critical element of anyone who's teaching a kid with autism. How many words can I use that you understand and can respond to? But if I'm using 15 words in a direction or a question and you don't understand, well, let's say 14 of them, I'm actually interfering with you learning language, not helping you learn language. I mean, I'm fine with them saying bell, then say bell, give them the bell. Say bell, give them the bell. So there's a relationship between bell, the word, and getting that thing. But asking him, what would you if you want the bell, you need to say, I want bell, please. Literally just disregards this kid's language level of understanding and ability to respond. It isn't teaching him what a bell is and how to ask for it. It's testing to see whether he understands a level of language we know he doesn't. That's going to slow acquisition rather than speed it. But philosophy affects it. And this line, because it's repeated in the training when you go there live, it's repeated in the book, and it's repeated in the DVD training series. It's not about being right or wrong. There is no right or wrong. It's about that process where you both learn from those interactions. Well, yeah, there's learning happening there. It is, if I want the bell, I just have to reach for it and grab it. That's how I get the bell. Eventually, I will always get the bell. Language isn't really part of that process. And speaking of changing behavioral expectations,
I'm a king.
Oh,
Hello,
you
sir.
crowned him.
Hello, sir. Give me 5. Give me 5. No, you can't have my crown. You want my crown back? You have to say, I want crown. You have to say, I want a crown.
I want
You have
crown.
to say,
Can you tell him you want the crown? Say,
You say-
crown, please.
You have to say crown, please.
Crown,
Can you
please.
say crown, please? Can you say mine? Say
You
mine.
can say mine.
Oh,
Mine.
you gotta say mine. It's stuck. It's stuck. Say unstuck. Oh, we got a stuck in crown. It's stuck in
Can you
my
say
head.
mine?
Can you say mine? The magic word is mine. Can you say my crown? Yeah!
You did it.
You said mine.
did the kid eventually say mine? No. To me, if you knew that he could say the word mine, you say, mine, give it to him, mine, give it to him. You could teach that. But they start by saying, you have to say, I want crown, please. Can you say, give me crown? Crown, say, I want, say unstuck. what is the thing you're teaching there? And he just keeps grabbing, and they just keep changing what he has to do until finally something happens and he gets it. But the whole time he's persistent reaching and grabbing. Now, if I'm him, what do I have to say and do to get that item? Continue to reach and grab. And for a long time. Are we teaching or testing to see what might eventually show up? And I was like this one.
Try to join. You're a player too.
You're a player too.
So you want to go down now. Try to get into it as another player.
Do you want to go down?
And again,
I wanna go down.
personalize the players.
I want to go down. I want to go down with Corey. Zoom. And wait for me, I'm your mommy. Wait for me. Wait for me, I'm your papa. Wait for me. Make room. Make room.
He's so engaged with her, right?
Wait for me. The daddy is coming. Everybody into the pool.
Try to hold on to it a little longer so he looks at you, so he tugs your hair.
That's good
So he
advice.
might repeat the name of someone that he really knows.
Wow,
Where
where
is
is
he going?
Where is Papa going?
Where's Papa go? Now, to me, follow the child's lead. You've got a kid who's taking the thing from your hand and putting it down the slide. You could very easily just, down slide each time, down, and label what he's doing, and he might actually learn that action. Instead, she's, what is Papa doing? Well, Papa's thinking about going for, how is he supposed to answer that question? And it's as if there's a fundamental belief that he actually has the language skills to answer that question, which he does not. That's kind of a cruel thing. Hey, I'm going to give you a test you can't possibly pass over and over again. That's my treatment, because I'm trying to repair the relationship between us.
Okay. Now again, call them the names of the people that you know,
Who's the
and
dad?
then
Is that
doesn't
Papa?
answer, let him find
Is
it.
that a Papa?
Which hand is it? And try to get a little bit more focused.
Which one would you like? Tell Mommy, do you want the girl? Okay. Do you want the daddy? Tell Mommy, Dada. You want the Dada? Dada. The Dada's going up. Tell Mommy which one you want. You tell Mommy. Tell Mommy. Which one is that? Tell Mommy, Papa. Tell Mommy the Papa. Papa going down. What will happen now?
And from Dr. Greenspan's perspective, here's a parent trying to engage with her child using language and affect. From a behavioral perspective, there's a kid grabbing the thing and getting it every time. Not using language, and not a process by which we say. So you want to say Papa or whatever it is you want to say, you could say that and give it to him, and might create some relationship between that action and that word and getting it. But that's not part of the teaching process, because teaching skills is not what you're supposed to be doing. Working on the relationship is what you're supposed to be doing. So understand that, like, I look at that and say, that's just really poor examples of teaching. It's part of the training series because it's a great example of a parent trying to engage their child in an area that the child's interested in.
I know it's hard, sweetie. Look, he's doing something. Just go follow with what he's doing. He's biting this. Why don't you just pretend it's a lollipop? See if you can do it.
So he's doing something, follow his lead. What is he doing that you're going to follow?
No, you want it? Okay, you can have it. You just soothe him. Just soothe him. Yeah. What's the matter?
It's hard.
I know.
It's so much stuff to do.
In both of those examples, the child's using behavior to control the behavior of the adults very effectively. There isn't language instruction going on, which is what we would want to see, except that from the perspective of floor time, those are good examples of a parent working on their relationship, their emotional relationship and engagement with their child. Those are in there not because they did bad editing. They're in there because they are good examples of what Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weeder are looking for. But they have tremendous effects, and this section is in here because I like to compare the intent, purpose, and function of both treatments. And if you're doing an ABA program where you're doing certain kinds of structured teaching and consistent responding, having someone who you're teaching to use a picture exchange communication system, in order to get that crown or to get that toy, they have to exchange. And that's the consistent requirement you put in place. But at the same time, someone's doing floor-time therapy where reaching and grabbing and taking it will absolutely be honored and produce them getting it. It's going to interfere. And I have this sort of line, I like to call it reach, grab, and take. You know, that's what I see when I see that kid doing. There's not a communicative routine being established. They reach, they grab, they take it, and there isn't actually an instruction other than, if you want stuff, that's what you got to do. That will increase grabbing and decrease use of picture exchange communication system. That kid climbing all over Dr. Greenspan in the video where he's contorting himself trying to get out of range, I like the idea he's trying to limit, well, why not establish a communicative routine? Eventually that kid learned, I must climb on you and over you to get those items. That's part of the process of how you get, that's how you man for things. And again, in that process, you have more systematic ignore language practice going on. These are things that absolutely, if you've got an ABA program that is a blended model, expect it to decrease rate of learning for you. Expect it to interfere with that. Expect that competing histories of reinforcement for using problem behavior and not using language to slow the effects of a good ABA treatment program. The idea that you can have a blended model, and that's a good idea, because of the difference in philosophies, the difference in treatment methodologies and procedures, that's just not true. In fact, there are two really good publications by Jane Howard and colleagues around essentially eclectic models combining Floortime and ABA and other treatments that show very clearly worse outcomes happen. That individual differences in sensory processing we talked about earlier, now you've seen a couple of videos. Where in there did you see either the some changes in the behavior of the parent or by Dr. Greenspan or Dr. Weeder in some sensory presentation? Did they talk softer or louder? Did they use more physical touch in some way systematically? I mean, floor time is supposed to be about individual differences in sensory processing. In those videos, you see no evidence whatsoever that they have identified some characteristics of sensory processing differences in those kids, and then altered instruction as a function of that. Despite that that's one of the three pillars, there's really no evidence that actually happens. And there aren't procedures saying you need to assess for these sensory differences and here are the things you do to adjust. And this is one of those ones that fundamentally they believe this because, I mean, we all know the kids we work with have often unique sensory interests, challenges, responses to changes in the environment. Those are things that we can observe, right? We know that some of our kids in loud environments might put their hands over their ears. In some other environments they might not like, or some people are more sensitive to touch. But we just try to desensitize to them things and build their ability to tolerate those things, as opposed to here where they say, we need to take those into consideration in our treatment in some therapeutic way. It just doesn't happen. And at least in the training I went through and in the videos and in the book, there's a talk about the need to do that without any corresponding procedures and methodologies for doing so. And R is for relationship-based. And as I mentioned, that refers to the relationship between the parents and that child. That's the problem, and that's what Floortime treats. Make no mistake about that. Floortime is not treating the child. Floortime is about treating the parents whose fundamental interactions are deficit. They don't provide the right nutriments, as Dr. Greenspan says, in terms of their emotional relationship with that child, and that caused that child to choose to go into this other world and avoid interactions with these emotionally deficit parents. So that's what's got to be fixed. Of course, I ask you, what kind of relationship are you building by having that kid learn to systematically not respond to that parent? And I'd say not a good one. Now, I will also say that that's how Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider envision floor time. I don't know how it's operationalized here in Sweden, but I see lots of people who do things that I would absolutely consider good and call it floor time because they really don't understand what floor time is and what they're supposed to be doing. So there are bad versions of floor time that are actually maybe actually be good treatment, but they're not floor time, and that's what fundamentally people don't realize. They think they're doing floor time and they're really not. If they're being systematic about how they interact with a child, it's really not floor time. And I just think it's funny to watch these videos because this is after you see all of those treatment videos, there's some conversation between Dr. Greenspan and Dr. Weider, and it's a little bit awkward on the cushy chairs and on the floor, so it looks interesting to me. But they make some statements about these kids that, even from those little clips, you'll find interesting.
But the primary ability to be connected, to be related, to be engaged, to use affect, to find meaning in things, and to mediate the problem solving, and mediate the pretend play is in place, is there. So that's very nice to see for him. So we have...
So I like that clip because he basically said, all of the things that are problematic in their assessment are fine. So what do you need to do then? And why is he still not talking and relating and all of those things? But they're all there. All of the milestones are there. For the kid who's 22 months old and has essentially no expressive language and some pretty significant deficits.
But he was so good at communicating what he wanted when he wanted it.
Did you guys see that? Because I missed it.
Organize almost always around some intentional, pre-symbolic activity. So I think that part's going to develop well as he gets more interactive in terms of lengthening some of these sequences. He was a good problem solver that way.
The reinterpretations that they have literally do not match the things. Which kid are they talking about? Because I had to go back and say, wait a minute, that's not what I saw in these videos.
He was able to respond to the mom when she needed help pretty consistently. So I thought certainly in the context we observed him, we see his receptive processing improving very nicely. And as you said, we need to really encourage more of the expressive, because you would expect somewhat more language, but I think it will come because I think he has strong intent. And that strong affective processing will help him say more and more, I think, sooner.
Pretty consistent with what you guys saw in the videos, right? His strong intent and language should be just show up.
In terms of just general follow-through, not so much language per se, so I think language will come in all right for him, with particularly the kind of dynamic interactive work that mother is already doing.
And I like that last line because he genuinely believes that with the kind of affective work that they're doing, language will just show up. Because language isn't there because of this emotional problem, not because kids don't. The fundamental belief is kids learn language naturally. It's easy for kids if they have that emotional substrate in place. So there isn't a need for a speech and language pathologist to teach specific verbal operants or any other expressive and receptive communication and social skills. Those will just come in. So if you see a floor time program where they're actually working on those things, recognize they don't understand floor time. You don't do that. There's no need to do that. That stuff just shows up. It occurs naturally. Oh, we got time? Cool. Which is perfect, actually. So, actually, this might be the perfect place to stop. Hopefully that gave you a pretty good understanding of how floor time and ABA differ. They differ pretty dramatically in terms of what the problem is and what the treatments then flow from those problems. And that hopefully will put you in a better position to talk about floor time to other people in the future. It's very different than who we are, what we do. But if you're a floor time therapist and you believe that that's the problem, doing those things makes sense because you're addressing the real problem. Those of us who do intensive treatment are not addressing the real problem. We're addressing those sub-skills that don't really address the fundamental problem of relatedness from their perspective. From our perspective, I don't even know what that problem is. These are the skills we need to work on, and when we do that, they tend to get them. So, thank you very much.